Fake HOA cops crushed my son's leg. I grabbed the AK-47 and fired instantly. They came into a quiet neighborhood posing as HOA enforcers and shattered a 12-year-old boy's leg in front of his father. Dressed in fake uniforms and armed with false authority, these men thought no one would dare stop them. But Tom Harris, a combat veteran and protective father, made one decision that turned the entire situation upside down. Just wait until you hear the twist that changed everything, and how justice, in the end, didn't just arrive, it stood its ground. Cedar Creek Drive was the kind of street where people left garage doors open, not out of forgetfulness, but trust. The lawns were trimmed, the mailboxes clean, the rhythm of life familiar and gentle. It was a pocket of the American dream, stitched neatly between highway exits and elementary school zones, the kind of place where bad things just didn't happen. Tom Harris believed in that rhythm. Not naively. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and knew better than most what the world was capable of. But here, in this corner of Austin, Texas, with its pastel-colored houses and sprinkler hiss in the evenings, he'd finally built a place where his guard could rest. That Saturday, just after 6 p.m., he and his 12-year-old son, Zach, were doing something simple, something good. They were playing basketball in their driveway. Tom rebounded, Zach shot, back and forth, again and again. The hoop was one of those portable ones you fill with water at the base, faded from the sun but still sturdy. Zach missed more shots than he made, but every bucket was followed by a grin that could melt steel. Tom was smiling too. For him, these were the moments that made the long nights overseas worth it. His boots off, his hands calloused from home repairs instead of rifle grips, watching his son be a kid. Then something changed. It started with a sound, low and slow, a car engine moving at a crawl, not loud enough to alarm, but just odd enough to interrupt the moment. Tom looked up. A dark blue Dodge Durango was easing its way down the street. Too quiet, too slow. It wasn't one of the usual neighbor cars. No stickers, no decals, no front license plate. The back one was either missing or obscured. It rolled past the Sanders place, then the Gutierrez house, then slowed again, right in front of Tom's. The engine didn't shut off. It idled. Tom narrowed his eyes. His instincts weren't screaming, not yet, but a familiar pressure had started building in the base of his spine. That quiet, old feeling from combat. Watch closely. Something's not right. The front doors opened almost in sync. 2 men stepped out. They wore tactical-style vests with large block letters that read HOA Enforcement. Their uniforms were black on black, cargo pants, utility belts, radios clipped to the shoulders. They wore boots made for more than walking and mirrored sunglasses that reflected the entire street without revealing their eyes. They didn't greet anyone. They didn't glance around or knock on a door. They looked directly at Tom, and then at Zach. Tom instinctively stepped forward, a slight shift in posture. He wasn't trying to be aggressive, just ready. The men started walking toward the driveway, not quickly, but deliberately. There was something rehearsed about it, like they'd done this before, too many times. Tom spoke first. "Can I help you with something?" No answer. Just a half-second pause. Then one of the men, the taller of the two, bald, with a tattoo peeking out from under his collar, raised his chin. "You've been issued a violation. Portable sports equipment visible from the road. It's not permitted by HOA guidelines." Tom blinked. "We're just playing a game," he said calmly. "That's not a permanent setup." The second man, shorter, stockier, stopped halfway up the driveway, hand hovering near the strap on his vest. He didn't look at Tom when he spoke. He looked at Zach. "You were warned," he said flatly, "and warnings have consequences." Zach had paused mid-dribble, the ball cradled against his hip. He looked up at his dad, confused. "What are they talking about?" Tom took a slow step forward. "Whatever issue you have," he said firmly, "you bring it to me, not my kid." Still, there were no badges, no IDs, no HOA car, no clipboard, no documents, just Two men, uninvited, wearing gear that didn't belong, standing on private property with the confidence of people who expected obedience. And just like that, the calm of the day dissolved. It didn't shatter. It slipped, quietly, like a curtain being pulled back. And what waited behind that curtain was something Tom hadn't felt in years. Incoming danger. The taller man, the one with the shaved head and a spider tattoo coiling down the side of his neck, stepped forward and raised his voice, not in explanation, but in accusation. "You've been warned," he said sharply, his voice carrying down the quiet street. "No basketball hoops visible from the street. That's a clear violation of HOA regulation." Tom didn't move. He tried to process what he'd just heard. "Excuse me?" he replied, confused. "What warning? We didn't get any—" But the man wasn't listening. His eyes flicked to Zach, still holding the ball, still frozen in place. In the same moment, the second man, shorter, stockier, jaw clenched tight, suddenly closed the distance between them. There was no hesitation, no signal, no cause. He reached out, grabbed the front of Zach's t-shirt near the collarbone, and with a sharp motion, shoved him backward. It all happened in a blur. Zach stumbled, his small sneakers catching on the uneven concrete edge of the curb. His arms flailed for balance, but there was nothing to grab. His body tilted, twisted, and then went down. He landed hard on the pavement, hip first, then side, then leg, the kind of fall that sends silence through a crowd, even when no one's speaking. Except this wasn't silence. There was a sound, deep, unnatural, followed immediately by Zach's cry. It wasn't a normal shout or a kid's yell of frustration. It was sharp, sudden, and pure, the kind of scream that cuts through everything. Tom's heart lurched. He ran, not even thinking, just moving. By the time he reached his son, Zach was curled on his side, clutching his thigh, his face drained of color, jaw clenched in pain. He wasn't crying now, not yet, just breathing hard, trying to understand what his body had just told him. Tom dropped to his knees. "Zach! Zach! Look at me. What hurts?" Zach's answer came through gritted teeth. "My leg. Dad, I can't move it." Behind them, the two men didn't move. They stood there, arms crossed, almost casual, like they'd just enforced a parking rule, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Tom turned to them, the old tension rising fast. "What is wrong with you? He's 12. You put your hands on my son." The bald one stepped forward again, tone cold, flat. "You failed to comply. Non-compliance has consequences. We're authorized to respond." Tom's eyes narrowed. He could feel it now. This wasn't about rules. These men didn't work for the HOA. They weren't here for any real purpose. They were here because they believed they could be. That's when something inside him shifted. The part of him that had once scanned rooftops for threats. The part that had survived real war zones. The part that had sworn he was done with all that, reactivated. He stood up. The men watched him. Tom didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't even speak. He turned, walked toward the house, and disappeared inside. Because behind that door, secured in a locked safe that only he knew the code to, was something he never thought he'd need again. And for the first time in years, he was reaching for it. Zach lay crumpled on the driveway, unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His leg, the one he'd just used to launch a perfect jump shot minutes earlier, now twisted at an angle no leg should ever make. His shoe had come loose. The laces dragged across the pavement like a ribbon dropped in the dirt. His hands clutched at his thigh, but he didn't cry. Not yet. His mouth was open, more in disbelief than sound, like he hadn't fully caught up with what had just happened, but his body had. His body knew something was wrong. The pain was catching up. Tears began to form at the corners of his eyes, and his breathing turned sharp, uneven. Tom dropped beside him, barely able to register anything except his son's face. "Zach, I'm here," he said, voice tight, controlled, but his hands were trembling. "Don't move, okay? I'm right here." Zach turned his head slightly, eyes wide, mouth quivering. Then, click. The metallic sound behind Tom didn't belong. It wasn't the sound of help arriving. It wasn't a siren or a neighbor calling out. It was the sound of a device being armed. Tom turned slowly and saw it. One of the men, the stockier one, now had a stun gun drawn. The black body of the device was aimed directly at Tom's chest, just a few feet away. The man didn't blink. "Step back," he said. "HOA enforcement is authorized to detain during compliance escalation." The words came out flat, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. But that wasn't the part that made Tom's heart freeze. It was the certainty. These weren't people trying to resolve a complaint. These were people who expected obedience, and who had come prepared to force it. No badge, no nameplate, no visible ID, just patches stitched onto generic tactical gear, and a weapon now aimed at a father kneeling beside his injured son. Tom raised his hands slightly, not out of surrender, but instinct. He wasn't sure what they'd do next. He'd seen eyes like that before, overseas, in places where power meant whatever you could take. This was his home, his son, his soil, and in that moment, something shifted. Not a burst of anger, not even panic. It was clarity, a calm, controlled decision that came not from fear, but from the knowledge that no one was coming unless he acted first. Tom looked at Zach one more time. The boy had closed his eyes now, whispering through shallow breaths. "Dad." Tom stood up slowly. The man with the stun gun tensed, just slightly, but didn't speak. Tom didn't either. He turned and walked toward the house, each step deliberate, even, final. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just moved through the hallway, down the short corridor to the hallway closet. The air inside the house felt colder than it had a moment ago. Quieter. He reached the safe, pressed in the 6-digit code with calm, practiced fingers. The lock clicked. He opened the door and lifted the rifle. Not because he wanted to use it, but because he couldn't risk not having it. Because this time, the threat wasn't across an ocean. It was standing on his driveway. The door to the house creaked open. Tom stepped out slowly. Not running, not shouting, but with the deliberate stillness of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Cradled in his hands was an AK-47, not aimed, not raised, but carried low and steady, barrel tilted slightly downward. The weight of it was familiar. His grip, muscle memory. His breath, even, centered. His training hadn't just come back, it had taken over. No thoughts, just calculation. Target, distance, terrain, civilians nearby, line of sight. But this wasn't a war zone. This was his front yard. And yet, the difference had just become irrelevant. The two men had taken one step closer to Zach, maybe thinking they could still intimidate, maybe believing that Tom wouldn't escalate, maybe forgetting who they were dealing with. Tom's voice rang out, calm but sharp enough to cut the air in two. "Step away from my son, now." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The bald man flinched, the first crack in his false confidence. The other man, the one who'd drawn the stun gun, moved his hand instinctively toward his waistband, as if weighing the idea of pulling something, or pretending he had something more. Then Tom clicked the safety off. That sound was unmistakable. It wasn't aggressive, it was final. And suddenly, everything changed. The power dynamic, the invisible force they thought they controlled, evaporated. Neither man spoke. Neither moved. Their body language shifted, backs straightened, hands slightly raised, eyes darting, scanning for exits. For the first time since they stepped onto the property, they looked uncertain. And then they began to step backward, slowly. One step, then two, toward the SUV. Their hands were up now, not high, not surrendering, but cautious, palms slightly visible. The bravado was gone, replaced by a calculation of risk. Tom didn't advance. He didn't lower the rifle either. He stood perfectly still, legs shoulder-width apart, weapon held as if it were a shield more than a sword. The wind shifted slightly, brushing the trees overhead. And then A sound, distant but rising, began to thread through the silence. Sirens. At first, faint, but unmistakable, growing louder, echoing through the neighborhood like a warning bell. The fake officers turned their heads, startled. Whatever plan they had, whatever confidence they'd walked in with, it was unraveling. Tom didn't flinch. His eyes never left them, because he knew what they didn't. The cavalry wasn't just coming. It was almost here. Across the street, behind a trimmed hedge and a white porch railing, Marilyn Rivera stood frozen in place. 62 years old, widowed, and retired from a lifetime of working as a nurse in emergency rooms. She'd seen more than her share of chaos. But this was different. It wasn't the kind of emergency that arrives with sirens and flashing lights. This was the kind that walks quietly onto your street, wearing a vest, and assumes no one will question it. But Marilyn did. The moment she saw the words HOA enforcement printed across their backs, too big, too bold, something clicked in her. They didn't look like they belonged. Their vests looked more like military cosplay than any official uniform she'd seen. And in her 30 years living in the neighborhood, she had never, not once, heard of armed HOA enforcers. She grabbed her phone, stepped back inside, and typed those 3 words into a search bar. HOA Enforcement Division, Texas, nothing. No department, no agency, no affiliation, not in the state, not in the county, not even in her own HOA's website. Then came the sound, a sharp scream from across the street. She rushed to the window just in time to see Zach hit the pavement and Tom fall to his knees beside him. Her stomach turned. By the time she picked up the phone to call 911, her voice was already tight. There are 2 men on my neighbor's property impersonating officers. They just pushed his son down. He's badly hurt. They say they're HOA enforcement, but they're not. Please, send someone now. The dispatcher asked questions. Marilyn answered them quickly, clearly, calmly, her nurse instincts taking over. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't speculate. She just told the truth. And when she hung up, she watched as Tom reappeared with a rifle, watched as the men backed away, suddenly not so sure of themselves, and finally watched as the real deputies arrived. The first patrol car came in fast, followed by another, both units from the Travis County Sheriff's Office, lights flashing, engines roaring. The officers didn't hesitate. They exited the vehicles in synchronized motion, weapons drawn, commands sharp and unambiguous. Hands where we can see them, on the ground, now! The 2 impersonators froze. One dropped instantly, face down on the pavement. The other hesitated, maybe thinking he still had some kind of control left. He didn't. One officer moved in. The man resisted. For a split second, tension escalated again, until a burst from the deputy's taser sent him to the ground, finally compliant. Cuffed, disarmed, exposed. Tom stood still through all of it. The AK still rested in his hands, though the barrel was now lowered toward the earth. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. When the closest deputy turned toward him, he lifted his free hand slowly and said, steady as stone, "It's over." He paused, then looked back at Zach, still lying beside the basketball hoop, barely conscious but alive. But not for me. Because even though the danger was gone, the impact wasn't. Not for Tom, not for his son, not for the neighborhood, and definitely not for the men who came thinking they could walk in, pretend to be something they weren't, and walk away untouched. The emergency room lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the walls as Zach lay motionless on the hospital bed. His leg was immobilized, wrapped tightly in layers of padding and fiberglass, elevated slightly on a cushion. The X-rays told the full story. A clean break through the femur, one of the strongest bones in the body, now separated like a snapped branch. The orthopedic surgeon explained it in neutral, careful language. No surgery yet. First, the swelling had to go down. Then came pins. Then came physical therapy and months of recovery. But what hurt more, to everyone in the room, was not the injury itself. It was the look in Zach's eyes. He wasn't crying from the pain anymore. The medication softened that. It was something else. Fear. "Why did they do that to me, Dad?" he whispered, his voice blurred by morphine, but the question clear as glass. Tom sat beside him, elbows on knees, fingers knotted together. He didn't speak right away, because the truth was, he didn't know. There was no reason that would make sense to a child, or to any decent person. He brushed Zach's hair back gently and just said, "You didn't do anything wrong." But deep down he needed to understand why, not just for Zach, for himself, for every neighbor who trusted the quiet of their street. And he wasn't alone. The sheriff's department had already begun digging deeper. By the next morning, deputies confirmed the 2 men in custody weren't just trespassers, they were repeat offenders. Both had criminal records. One had done time for assault and impersonation. The other had convictions across multiple counties under different aliases. They weren't affiliated with any homeowners association. The uniforms were stitched at home or bought online. The patches were fake. The violation slips they issued were printed on office paper. And the most disturbing part? This wasn't the first time. Sheriff Wallace, the lead investigator, called Tom in for a formal statement, not to question him, but to listen, because his report matched others. A handful of cases in the past 6 months where HOA officers had appeared unannounced, issued phony fines, and pressured residents, often newcomers, often single parents, into handing over cash or access to their homes. But no one had fought back. Until now. Tom's encounter had broken the pattern, not just because of what happened, but because it had been seen, witnessed, documented, and now, finally, investigated. In Zach's hospital room, the machines beeped quietly. Nurses moved gently, checking monitors and adjusting medication. Tom stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the sun rise over the parking lot. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was focused. There were more questions to ask, and someone needed to answer them. The story didn't stay local for long. Within hours, headlines spread across news sites and social media. HOA vigilantes injure child. Father defends son with assault rifle. No charges filed. Talk shows picked up the incident. Some called Tom a protector. Others questioned the presence of firearms in residential areas. Online, the debates were loud, full of opinions from people who had never set foot on Cedar Creek Drive. But his neighbors knew better. To them, Tom wasn't a headline. He was the man who loaned tools without asking for them back. The dad who always waved when driving by. The veteran who kept his yard neat but never judged others for theirs. Support came quickly. Homemade meals arrived at the door. Grocery bags, gift cards, and handwritten notes piled up on the porch. One read, "You did what any good father would do. Thank you for protecting your son and all of us." Veterans organizations reached out, offering to cover medical costs, provide legal assistance, or just talk. Strangers donated online to help with Zach's recovery. And from the county courthouse came a clear decision. The district attorney, after reviewing the evidence, made it official. You acted in defense of your child and your property. Under Texas law, you are within your rights. No charges will be filed. Tom didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. Quiet. Because for him, justice wasn't about headlines. It was about his son, and making sure this never happened again. Justice didn't come quickly, but when it came, it was measured, clear, and lasting. The man with the shaved head, the one who had barked commands and watched a child fall, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. His partner, the one who reached for his waistband and pulled a stun gun on a father, received 12 years. The charges were extensive: impersonating an officer, aggravated assault on a minor, criminal trespass, and organized fraud. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear. These men were just the tip of something larger. What started as a single assault in a quiet suburb unraveled into a multi-state operation. Investigators uncovered a scheme that spanned across 3 states, targeting vulnerable communities, often new homeowners or elderly residents. The perpetrators wore fake uniforms, used forged IDs, and operated under the illusion of authority. They issued false citations, demanded on-the-spot compliance fees, and when challenged, used intimidation tactics that had worked until they reached Tom Harris. One injury stopped them, one refusal unraveled them. But Tom wasn't finished. He filed a lawsuit against the HOA itself, not for the crime, but for what he called gross negligence. The Homeowners Association had no legal link to the men, but their lax security, failure to verify unauthorized inspectors, and lack of resident protection made them part of the problem. And in court, that argument held. The judge ruled in Tom's favor. The HOA was ordered to restructure, retrain its leadership, and implement strict identity protocols. They were fined, sanctioned, and their internal emails, which had ignored prior complaints, became public record. No one in the neighborhood looked at their mailbox the same way again. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory stood in the driveway months later. Zach, still leaning on crutches, still working through the pain, but smiling wider now. He'd been through something no child should face. And yet, there he was, laughing again, leaning on his father's shoulder, asking when he could get back on the court. Neighbors still waved when they passed. Some paused longer. Some just gave Tom a nod, not out of fear, but respect, because no one forgot what he did that day. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it for one reason only, to stand between his son and something that should have never crossed their front yard. And because of that choice, no fake enforcer would ever walk that street again. The AK-47 didn't go back into the gun safe. It didn't disappear into storage or into some locked box in the garage. It stayed exactly where Tom had placed it the day everything changed. Secured, unloaded, inside a locked display cabinet near the front door. Visible, present. Not as a threat, but as a statement. To some, it might have seemed like an overreaction. To Tom, it was something else entirely. It wasn't about preparing for the worst. It was about remembering what had already happened. Because for Tom, peace wasn't the silence between storms. It was knowing that when the wind rises, you don't flinch. That when the line is crossed, you don't retreat. And more than anything, it was the reminder that safety isn't passive. It has to be protected. Zach was healing. His crutches had become a walking boot. He laughed again, played video games, talked about school dances and homework like any other boy his age. But sometimes, just sometimes, he still looked toward the driveway with hesitation. And Tom saw it. That's why the rifle stayed close. Not because he expected trouble, but because he'd already lived the moment when danger dressed like authority, walked up his driveway, and tried to take what didn't belong to it. At night, when the house was quiet and the lights dimmed, Tom would sometimes pass by the cabinet. He didn't open it. He didn't touch the weapon. He just stood for a moment, hand resting on the wood, and let the memory of that day flicker in his mind. The scream, the sound of sirens, the moment when he realized that no one else was going to act unless he did, if it ever happened again. He wouldn't raise his voice. He wouldn't beg. He would protect, without hesitation, not out of rage, but out of love, because for Tom Harris, peace had a cost. And now he understood exactly what it was.